What's up? This is Dr. Taylor Crick, host of the Autoimmune Doc podcast, and here's our latest study review here. This is about neurological autoimmunity, neurological autoantibodies. This is something that I see clinically very often, is that we see people with neurological symptoms and we maybe measure neurological autoantibodies, and they don't have maybe necessarily an autoimmune disease. They've been to a neurologist, they don't have MS, they don't have, neuropathy. Some of these people are fairly young, but this paper is, just retrospectively looking at a cohort of 24 people with weird symptoms and comparing their neurological antibodies to, and they've had toxic exposure. So anyway, let me just start reading. The paper is called Neural Autoantibodies in Patients with Neurological Symptoms and Histories of Chemical/Mold Exposure. So we see it a lot in mold. There's other chemical exposures that can do very similar things. It's from the journal Toxicology and Industrial Health. It's from 2017. And these are the three doctors who published it. So a number of studies, this is the abstract, a number of studies have linked exposures to industrial and household chemicals and biological toxins to increased risk of autoimmunity in general and elevated levels of autoantibodies to neural antigen specifically. So autoantibodies meaning signs that the immune system has flagged parts of the nervous system or parts of the body as enemy, or it's flagged them as abnormal, and so it can mount a what's called a T cell response against parts of the body. It's the key cornerstone feature of autoimmunity. Elevated neural antibodies are biomarkers for many diseases such as MS and Parkinson's. Our study reports levels of 6 types of antibodies in a group of 24 toxicant-exposed patients. The patients were exposed to a variety of toxicants, including contaminated drinking water in 4 of the patients, building water/mold damage in 8 of the patients, pesticides in 4 of the patients, and other assorted toxic chemicals in 8 patients. Level of all 6 neural antibodies were significantly elevated in most patients, and in the patient group at large, with the mean antibody level for the 24 chemically exposed patients up this much. So compared to a healthy control population, there's 475% increased production of antibodies against tau proteins, 391 for microtubule associated proteins, 334 for neurofilament proteins associated with the Alzheimer's, 302 for myelin basic protein associated with MS and demyelinating diseases, 299% for glial fibrillary acidic proteins, and 225 for tubulin. Those are high numbers. Tau protein autoantibodies were significantly elevated in the people with peripheral neuropathy, muscle and joint pain, asthma, and chemical sensitivities, etc. This study adds, muscle, joint pain, asthma, apnea, whatever. This study adds to the literature the ability of a broad spectrum of environmental triggers adversely affecting the nervous system through the process of autoimmunity, which may explain the increasing incidence of neurodegenerative diseases. So, toxic exposures, I just highlighted some of this, you could look at the full text if you want, but toxic exposures have been implicated in the development and increased risk of neurodevelopmental and neurodegenerative diseases such as autism, ADD, cognitive and motor deficits, peripheral neuropathy, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. And there's some of the reviews. Chronic neurological and non-neurological diseases may be caused, at least in part, by autoimmune processes. Occupational and environmental exposure, such as smoking, pesticides, organic solvents, silica, particulates, and heavy metals like lead and mercury, have been linked to a wide range of autoimmune diseases like RA, lupus, type 1 diabetes, Sjogren's, and autoimmune thyroid diseases. And here are some of the papers linking those things. Exposure to toxic chemicals can increase the risk of autoimmunity by many mechanisms, including molecular mimicry, epitope spreading, apoptosis, and other forms of cell death, and altered gene expression. So it's just briefly reviewing that this literature is out there that toxins can cause autoimmunity via these different mechanisms like molecular mimicry, epitope spreading. And so, I talk about that in some of the podcast episodes if you want to know kind of what that means. Exposure to many types of bacterial and viral infections, Nutritional deficiencies such as low vitamin D and food allergens such as gluten allergy can also increase the risk of autoimmune disease. So again, just briefly touching on these things. Increased levels of autoantibodies to neural proteins have been seen in a number of inflammatory diseases of the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, including MS and chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. Autoimmunity and autoantibodies may also play a major role in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Increased levels of antibodies to neural proteins have been seen in a number of populations exposed to toxic agents, such as mold and mycotoxins, meaning this has been studied before by Andrew Campbell in 2013, by Gray and Thrasher, I believe, is on that in 2003. It's also been studied in airplane flight crews exposed to hydraulic fluids. So there's a lot of toxins in the air when you're in a plane. It's gross. And solvent contaminated domestic water supplies. And then pesticides, Jack Thrasher, arsenic, and gold miners exposed to mercury. So there's been studies showing this before, and that's all they're highlighting here. And then others with polychlorinated bisphenols and perfluorinated compounds in children consuming a high fish diet. A recent report that neural antibodies were significantly higher in a group of Gulf War veterans as compared to 10 controls with low back pain, etc. So they're just going through the literature that already exists that they're kind of riding the coattails of and kind of following up on and showing, hey, this isn't the first time that this has been shown. So I skipped some of this, some of the methods. I did highlight this because I just want to cover this. These are some of the things that we see clinically. These are some of the things that they saw in their paper. So out of, what did we say, 26 people, 24 people? Cognitive problems, loss of memory, concentration, executive function, 18 of the people. So we see that all the time, brain fog, memory loss. It's not like Alzheimer's, but it's just like, oh, I feel stupider than I used to be. Or I have trouble making executive function decisions and kind of running and controlling my life. 14 of the patients had chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia pain syndromes. 11 of them had depression and anxiety or anxiety. 11 of them had chronic headaches. 8 of them had muscle and joint pain. 8 of them had chemical sensitivity. 5 of them had shortness of breath. 5 of them had peripheral neuropathy. 4 had sleep apnea, 4 had dizziness. We see a lot of vertigo, nausea, different mast cell type of symptoms, tremors, hypothyroid, skin rash, diarrhea, GI issues, head, face, or neck pain, recurrent infections, twitching, leg edema, and then some had Lyme disease, hypertension, Lyme co-infections, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, lymphoma, dysphagia, tinnitus, back pain, rapid breathing. Most patients, it says, had multiple organ systems involved. We always joke that with our mold people, they've got a cardiologist, a neurologist, a gastroenterologist, a rheumatologist, an endocrinologist, and they all send them back to the psychologist or the psychiatrist. So yeah, not shocking to somebody that does this, but again, cool paper. Let's see what else I highlighted. So this is just the rest of the, the methods and the results and the discussions. I'm sure there's some more that I've highlighted here. First off, this is the limitations. I didn't highlight this, but they touch on the limitations. It's a small study, and there's a lot of factors, so they address that. They're not saying that this is the one exclusive factor. It's just saying, wow, what a mighty coincidence that all these people have been exposed to these toxins. They know they were exposed. They know they're experiencing these symptoms, and they know that they're expressing these antibodies. And if you consider that a mighty coincidence, then, I don't know what to tell you, but when you see it every day clinically, it becomes a little bit more than a mighty coincidence. So they talk about the limitations. So let's see here. Autoantibody levels to neural proteins may be useful biomarkers for the effects of neurological disease and exposure to chemicals. It is possible that the elevated neuroantibodies seen in this study were due to the chemical and mold exposures, or related to the adverse health effects, or a combination of these two factors. So when toxins damage tissue, then you get damage-associated molecular patterns, and you get autoantibodies from that. So there's multiple mechanisms that this could happen. Significantly elevated levels of autoantibodies to neurofilament and glial fibrillary protein, whatever that was, have been seen in multiple sclerosis patients as compared to healthy controls. And higher levels of both neurofilament and GFAP have been associated with worsened disease severity and progression. Neurofilament protein, by the way, is also the number one autoimmune cross reactivity from COVID spike protein antibodies. So, yeah, and it's associated with Alzheimer's. Exposures to a wide range of toxins can cause elevated levels of many neural autoantibodies. Increased levels of neural autoantibodies are associated with a wide range of adverse health effects, including cognitive problems, chronic fatigue, depression, headaches, muscle joint pain, peripheral neuropathy, and many others. This study adds to the axiom that genetics may load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. It also supports the role of toxic chemicals in causing the increasing incidence of neurodegenerative diseases. So, facts, neurodegenerative diseases are escalating. Facts, toxic exposures have been escalating. Facts, we see these autoantibodies that are linked between the two. That there's other studies besides this one that show that the more prolonged, the more abundant your exposure to these neurotoxins, the more likely you are to have antibodies, and higher levels of antibodies are associated with worse progression of neurodevelopmental and neurodegenerative diseases. It's not saying that for sure that this causes this. That's a whole different thing. Causation is a futile attempt. What we're saying is here's a fact, here's a fact, here's a fact. How can you ignore the fact that these three facts all link together?